welcome to the next episode of the More People podcast. I'm your host, Richard Hanwell, Managing Director for More People. I'm thrilled to say today I'm joined by Hannah Cuthbert. Welcome, Hannah. Hannah, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
So I am Hannah Cuthbert. I'm a recruitment consultant in the rural team at More People. I joined in February, so I've been here about 8 months now.
Hannah, you clearly have a strong passion and interest in agriculture. That's fair to say, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Sweeping generalisation, but unlike a lot of people in that industry, you weren't born directly into it. Where has that passion and interest come from?
Growing up in Lincolnshire, notoriously pretty barren for anything. Like when a bus comes more than once an hour, people are like beside themselves. So growing up, I had a lot of interest. I was sporty. I was in the dance classes, I was in the theatre classes. Friends at school, a lot of family friends all had farms, and sort of an odd weekend here and going into a field and being like, oh, what's that tractor doing? Why is that combine out? What does that machine on the road do? It sort of got me thinking, like, what is all this and why don't I know anything about it? So I had a family friend who dragged me along for probably like 2-3 years to various young farmers events, trying to get me in as a young person. Went along to a few meetings, turned out I knew quite a lot of the people, soon sort of found my group. We met once a week, but then had loads of other socials and making a difference really, and talking to other people that didn't know about farming, which I think then for me sort of realised that I wasn't the only one in the county that didn't really know what was happening on the roads and in the fields.
And then naturally went straight into a politics degree, obviously.
I did look at, do I go to Harper Adams, but am I just then surrounding myself with everyone who knows everything about farming, and how am I going to grow into that, and will I get up to speed? And I think a lot of people that I speak to are sort of put off by that, which to some degree maybe I was as well. I always had an interest in policy, in politics as well, and was looking through different areas as to what I was interested in. I've got some people that I went to uni with that like the healthcare side and did a placement in that. And for me, it was kind of like the supply chain, the food, the farming side of it. And, so many people are like, what does that have to do with farming? But actually, you look at the state of the country and the food production and the cost of living crisis, it all comes back to supply chain and food. So, throughout my degree, I did American politics and Russian politics and things like that. But ultimately, sometimes we bring it back to the Russian grain exports and sort of linking it all together and making people realise the importance of food and politics.
And then from uni, from placement year to further projects, it wasn't straight from uni to ourselves. There are a few other stopgaps in between. Just talk us through that.
Well, my first farming job, I was 16. I was on £5 an hour and I was picking up dead chickens and eggs, which wasn't the best job over summer when it's boiling hot and all your mates are like at pool parties and hanging around and you're doing this for a job. But it did give me good exposure. I understood what a farm manager did and that there was farm foreman and what their role was, and the accounting side of things that I hadn't really been exposed to that much so far. And then did my placement year at Brown & Co in the farm consultancy team, which was probably kind of like the big break that got me into things. That was very policy focused as well, which I think was what I needed and which gave me kind of a massive network of people, which I
huge amount of exposure, right? So you can start to understand it that little bit better.
Yeah, definitely. And from that, I then got a job at a big farming company working in the lab. I wasn't very good at science at school. I wasn't very good at biology, but had an interest in grain and farming and how it came in and the logistics, and felt quite switched on. And from that, sort of saw a massive farming enterprise and how they operated and the struggles they faced I'd seen on family farms as well. So sort of put it all into context for me. And then the following year did my first harvest. So finally learned to drive a tractor like 2 years in, which then led to a call up from a guy I know going, I've seen a video of you driving a tractor. Have you got 2 weeks spare to come and do a potato harvest? And I was like, I don't know how to do that. So I just kind of took every opportunity that was given to me. There was some people that I approached that were like, no, we need someone that can do X, Y, and Z, which I couldn't do. They wanted people that, had 10 years experience, which again, I didn't have. So, I had quite a lot of no's, but ultimately it led to a yes, which then gave me my big break, gave me different opportunities. The harvest job, I'd messaged him and said, I'll come and work for free. Like, I just want to be on a farm. I'll sit with you. I'll help out. Like, I'm not bothered if I'm not getting paid. It's just the exposure.
Just on the learning, just experiencing it. Wow.
Exactly. And then from that, he was like, actually, we could have another person on, no harm in that. It's more beneficial to the farm to have someone that can just get involved with every aspect. So, 1 minute I'm going to the post office with his merchandise, and the next I'm in a muddy field, to then filming videos for the NFU, to then carting grain. Like, it was such a varied role that I didn't know what I was doing 1 minute to the next, but ultimately gave me the exposure that led me to here.
Well, it nearly got you here. I nearly thought we got you, and we sat down to have a final meeting, and you told me you're off to Australia.
Yeah.
And it's just talk us through that one.
So obviously I did the harvest. It was a very wet harvest, very poor. It was very stop and go. I was kind of under the impression I'd be in a tractor for 10 hours a day and then be brilliant by the end and be reversing trailers and doing X, Y, and Z. But the reality, which was for a lot of farmers, was that it was a poor harvest. It was just like, I'm learning, but not what I thought I was going to learn. Like, I'd learned in other areas. And I'd never really got the idea of like going to the other side of the world to sit in a tractor. I was like, it doesn't appeal. And then I was like, we'll just do a visa and see what happens. And then next thing I know, I've got people messaging me going, oh, I hear you want to go to Australia. Here's a farm job. So on a pretty big whim, found a job through Facebook. She seemed all right. And then, from there, obviously, understanding their supply chain, how their grain grows. It literally grows in sand, which to us, we're like, sand, like we just have this horrible mud and it's always flooding. And, understanding their struggles as well as ours, I think was sort of useful for both parties, but definitely gave me kind of the confidence I needed within sort of my farming career, like you say, not coming from the background.
Yeah. So can you talk us through and just explain the differences between farming the UK and then having that exposure in Australia?
They value their food a lot more and sort of value where it comes from. There's so many factors to that. The scale that they farm in Australia, like one field that we do in a day was what took us 3 months to do in harvest because we're so stop and go. But they've got 3 times the amount of combines going. You've got 2 chaser bins, and in the UK, you'll go to the field, you'll get the grain, you'll drive it back on the road, you'll annoy all the farmers that are there, you'll annoy all the drivers that are on the roads, you'll get back, unload, drive back, and that's an hour and a half gone. But actually, over in Australia, you're just driving to the nearest bin, empty into there, and then a lorry comes from the nearest town, picks it up, and it's gone in 2 hours. And then from that, it goes straight to a factory, it's processed, exported, and it's very much at the forefront of the general public's eye because the nearest town, their grain store was massive, and you could see it from miles. Whereas in the UK, you just see a tractor on the road and you think, oh, I'm going to be late here, I'm going to be late there. You're not thinking like, oh, there's the grain that makes the sandwich that I'm eating. And I think it's just that appreciation of food, where it comes from, and there's a lot more emphasis on supporting like the local economy. Whereas over here, you can go to Tesco and get something for a quarter of the price. I get, cost of living, it's difficult, but actually if you're going on holiday 3 times a year and you've got your Netflix subscription and, you can see the farmer down the road struggling, those little times where you're going to just buy locally when you can and supporting them is the same as sort of supporting another local business.
Fantastic. So with that in mind, obviously, unfortunately, we can't change the climate in the UK, otherwise we would, but what other learnings could we take, do you think, in a perfect world from Australia and your exposure?
I think it's interesting that here at the minute, especially when I went out to Australia, there was a bit of a BPS frenzy over here where everyone's getting the basic payment, which for a lot of farmers was their salary. And, we're using that, which is now going, now we've left the EU. And it's so interesting that over in Australia, there isn't really any funding. There isn't really any grants. You just kind of farm for the profit and you farm because you can. Whereas over here, we're having to be a lot more diverse in going down the SFI route, the regen route, looking at our soils, other diversifications like leisure and hospitality. And it's just sort of using those, I think, and getting the government to understand how it is for farmers. And I think, a lot of MPs do make the effort to go out on farm, and I think the NFU do a really good job of lobbying that.
Yeah.
It's just sort of making it aware. You know, I think Jeremy Clarkson's done a really good job. People understand the struggles. He doesn't glamorize it as quite a lot of the farming shows do.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it just makes people realise actually the struggles of it. That, you know, I was talking to someone the other day and I was like, oh, so-and-so's wheat all failed. And they were like, so now what? It's like, we just have to plant it again next year and hope it doesn't happen. You know, they've just lost like £250,000. You just have to get another loan and just hope that next year they make some kind of money out of it.
We stumbled across it earlier, certainly the power of networking. You managed to find a job in Australia through the power of social media. You headline our very own Young People in Food and Farming programme. Just tell the audience, please, a small amount about that.
So Young People in Food and Farming is a network for people under the age of 30, give or take, who have an interest in food, have an interest in farming, will be employed in those kind of jobs, bringing them all together sort of around Stamford, South Lincolnshire. We had a few come over from Cambridge and Melton Mowbray. And just sort of, you know, power of network is knowing the right people, you know, even if it's not from our point of view, wanting a job, taking a job, getting someone else a job. It's understanding what's going on in the markets, where things are going, how things are going to change in the future. And, you know, through that, I think everyone's just meeting brand new people, whether that's someone that's in a similar firm to them as a rural surveyor, or whether it's a farmer meeting another farmer and going, oh, we don't do it like that, and having those discussions. It's just a space for people to have those conversations outside of their normal sort of social remit.
Yeah, I think getting like-minded people together in the same room. Well, we've done them in the past where we've had tours of breweries, we've had cocktail making. More recently, they've been around our office because of the space, but there's many plans in place, aren't there, to make it bigger and better. And long may we continue to grow that group. Brings me on to my final point. As recently as yesterday, you started over in the Future Farming programme. Just talk us through that, if you don't mind.
So the Future Farming Programme is by the School of Sustainable Food and Farming, which is a part of Harper Adams, relatively new in the last few years. It was a space for them to undertake research and developments in sustainable farming that are shorter term, so that farmers are getting the benefits sooner than that. And as part of that, they're running a programme for anyone under the age of 40 who's involved in any aspect in farming and agriculture, to come together over 9 months to understand sustainability, understand the farming side, the whole supply chain. You know, it's slightly disjointed between farmers, supply chain, supermarkets, and it's about bringing it all together. You know, sometimes having quite raw conversations about disgruntled farmers or supermarkets that don't think the messages are getting across, and it's a chance to sort of learn from that, meet like-minded people, and sort of eventually sort of all strive towards the same goal.
Fantastic. So seeing it from each of the side, working on the education and communication piece.
Yeah, definitely. So yesterday was the initial meeting, and then from that we've got regenerative farming days, online lectures, tutorials, meetings with other people. So it's a good opportunity, obviously, for the networking side, obviously from our point as well. Talks are from clients, so we're able to then sort of, when we're talking to potential candidates, understanding the client's perspective of sustainability and where they see that going. And, you know, that's quite important for a lot of candidates that I'm working with at the moment.
The challenges, the opportunities, and to educate ourselves. And you couldn't just sign up to this, could you?
No, there was a programme. So, yeah, it was a pretty lengthy application form. And then from that, they took 60 people on. I wasn't sure how well I was going to bode as not being a farmer on the Future Farmer programme. But actually, you know, it's open to everyone that's involved in food and farming. There was a lot of consultants and land agents and people involved in the supply chain, as well as a lot of farmers as well.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to hearing more about that. Hannah, you've been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.